everybody, it's JJ here, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to talk about my top 3 favorite opening lines in fiction. So here they are, the top 3 opening lines in fiction for me. Number 1, and these are in no particular order, "It was a pleasure to burn" by Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451. This is actually my top favorite novel of all time. This is the one I reread once a year. I take a day off work and I reread this book every year. And that line right there, "it was a pleasure to burn," sort of just captures you, and you're just like, wow, what is going on here? You delve into who Montag is, and it just pulls you into the story. And once you read that opening line, you can't help but be a little bit more compelled about what the story is going to do, how's it going to take place, and everything that's going to happen within the course of the story. I love a good dystopian thriller, especially ones that were written in like the 50s and 60s that sort of have our time, our world is sort of caught up with it. And I think this is very compelling. Ray Bradbury was definitely ahead of his time. He was definitely seen far off into the future in a way. He was looking things like television, things like that. He never really thought that maybe we would have pockets that, phones that we carry around in our pockets. But that opening line, "it was a pleasure to burn," it's one of my favorite opening lines that I've ever enjoyed. So there you go. Number 1 for me, "It's a Pleasure to Burn" by Ray Bradbury for Fahrenheit 451. Coming in at number 2, of course, is something that's outside of my wheelhouse, something I don't really read a lot of, and that, of course, is an old school sort of Victorian era type romance. And that number line is, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in position of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." And of course, that is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I remember the first time I ever heard the story of Pride and Prejudice. It was the old school black and white movie that I watched with my wife. We were dating at the time, and she wanted me to watch Pride and Prejudice. And I agreed to do that as long as she watched Die Hard. Although she had already seen Die Hard, so it was a little less sacrifice for her than it was for me. But I was compelled by the story. I thought that this was an amazing story. And then a couple years later, after we got married, she had this book, and I read Pride and Prejudice for the very first time. And I gotta say, Jane Austen is a very compelling writer. And that first opening line makes this story so much more richer than I thought it really was. It does more than it does the old school movie does, the black and white version. And that line I read it for the first time. I was like, okay, I'm hooked. And I think Jane Austen is an amazing author. If you've never read her and all you've ever read is like sci-fi and fantasy and things like that, I highly recommend you step outside of your comfort zone and read some Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is a great place to start. And of course, the number 3 opening line for me is, of course, From the Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. This isn't the prologue. It's not the prelude, but it is his prologue of Way of the Kings. And I'm going to butcher these fantasy names because I'm not very good at pronouncing them right, even though I've heard them said on the audiobook versions and things like that. But Zeth, son of Vellano, truthless of Chavanur, wore white on the day he was to kill a king. I remember when Sanderson came out with this book, he was in the middle of finishing The Wheel of Time, and I think this one came out, Way of Kings came out between his second and third book in the Wheel of Time series, right before Memory of Light. And I read the prelude to the series, and I thought, okay, this is cool. And then I got to the prologue, and I'm like, wait, we got a prologue to the book. Okay, this is cool. And I read that opening line and that opening scene and that sequence, and I instantly was just like, wow, I am hooked. The Way of Kings in the Stormlight Archive is one of those type of fantasies that only comes along every so often. And this book right here made me really enjoy Sanderson as an author. Actually, this isn't even my favorite in the series. Words of Radiance is actually my favorite in the series, but The Way of Kings pulled me in. I have been reading Sanderson ever since I found out that he was going to finish The Wheel of Time. And I think at that time he only had like 4 or 5 books out. He had the Mistborn trilogy, Launtress, and Warbreaker. And that was the only books that he had out when he first started writing The Wheel of Time. I think he also had the Alcatraz books out as well. But when I found out that he was going to finish The Wheel of Time, I thought, who is this fool? There's no way this guy can finish Robert Jordan's masterpiece. I read Mistborn for the first time, and I was beginning to be sold on Brandon Sanderson as an author. But when I got to The Way of Kings and I read that opening line, it hooked me and it pulled me right in. So there you go. Those are my top 3 favorite opening lines to a book. Let me know what yours is in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.